What's up, everybody? Greg LaBonte here with Maine Fly Guys. Today we're going to do a white hollow fly. It's articulated. It's going to be on a 3/0. This is a saltwater hook 3/0 with a 35 millimeter shank from Risen Fly. The shank is okay. I'll get to that later. But this is what I use to connect the two pieces. This is a super strand. It's a wire. 60 pound. It's quite stiff. It's not as flexible as some other ones. I like this to be quite stiff. It prevents fouling. So this fly will never foul, ever. Not once, ever. So to start here in the back, we are going to tie in 5 saddle hackle strands. These are all white. This fly is pretty much all white. I use some flash in either purple or like I don't know, iridescent rainbow pink are the two flashes I like. But here, start with the 5 saddle hackles. If you want it to be more or less, feel free, but I find that 5 is like the perfect amount. This fly overall is going to be somewhere between 6 and 8 inches long, and that depends on how long you want your hackle feathers to be. So I tie them right into the back. Make sure not to squish them too short, alright, because it looks kind of silly when you're at the end. So this is some small lateral scale. Here it's that kind of rainbow pinkish color. It's very iridescent, and you don't need a whole lot. In each time that I use it, I usually use somewhere between 3 and 5 strands. No more than 5, really. If I do, it's on accident, but somewhere between 3 and 5 strands. So here we're just gonna tie it in on one side, tie it down, and then we're gonna flip it over and tie it in on the other side. All of my flash, I want to get to right about the end of those hackle feathers. So each time I tie in flash, I'm trying to get it all the way back to the end of my hackle feathers. I'll trim it if it's too long, or I'll tie it in 2 separate times if it's too short. Sometimes when you get to the front of the fly, you can't flip it over because it's not long enough. So I'll tie it in 2 separate times. But for here, your first one, it's plenty long. I'm trimming it up just to make it equal length on both sides. So there it is. There's our first flash. So following the flash, we're going to start tying in series of bucktail. To start, you're going to want to use the very tip top of the bucktail. This will make sure that the bucktail does not flare up, but that it stays flat. The first couple, you don't want them being puffed up. These aren't hollow ties yet, they're just regular ties. So what I do is I grab sort of towards the tips of the hairs and I pull out the short fibers. We're going to lay it down. I try to go about halfway back to the saddle hackles. So when I lay down that first tie-in point, I want it to be the fibers to go back roughly about halfway. Some of them will be longer than others, so they'll reach a little bit more than half, but right around half. That's my kind of guide point. Sometimes it's a little longer, a little shorter, but no biggie. Halfway is kind of my benchmark to say, okay, this is where the bucktail fibers have to stop, right? So I'm going to do my first tie-in. Make sure you try to get a 360 degree profile. I do spin it around the shank. Sometimes it gets caught up, but do your best to spin it around equally, get an equal distribution all the way around. So after you've done your first tie-in, I just replicate the process, and I'm just going to speed it up for you right now. So now there are 2 tie-ins exactly the same. So I do 2 of them exactly the same, right back to back. Then after that second tie-in of bulkhead, I'm going to come back to the flash. Here again, I only have 3 strands here. I'm going to lay it down on one side, tie it in, flip it over, tie it in on the other side. All right, so it goes hackle, flash, bucktail, bucktail, flash. All right, and I like to do that every 2 major tie-in points to get some flash in there. That way we're just building this profile little bit by little bit. All right, so don't try to put everything on there all at once. Build it slowly, slowly, slowly. As I move forward in my fly, I'm gonna work down the bucktail. So now I'm gonna grab kind of from the middle. This hair is a little more dense, and it has a characteristic to spread out more when tension is put on it. So when you wrap your threads around it, it's going to spread out a little bit more than bucktail from the tip top of the tail. Okay, and you'll see what I mean in a second here. So again, I'm doing the same thing. I'm trying to lay the fibers so that they either reach where my previous fibers have reached or come up a little short. All right, and I usually try to come up a little short because it just sort of adds this layering effect. All right, so there you can already see that this hair, when I pulled down, it flared up just a little bit more. Not a lot, just a little bit. Just enough to start creating a profile of sort of a bait fish. And that's really what this pattern imitates, is a bait fish. All right, so clean up, cover up. The tips there, bucktail can get slippery, so if you don't cover up the tips, the individual hairs will have a tendency to fall out. So make sure you really wrap it up there tight. The thread that I'm using, which I don't think I've mentioned yet, is Danville's 210. So it's a pretty sturdy, it's flat and wax thread. It's a pretty sturdy thread. You can really put some tension on it, right? So here, you don't really need to worry about crowding the eye. It's not a big deal because this is your shank. It's not going to have any of your leader or tippet going through it. So you don't really need to worry about crowding the eye. It's not a huge deal if you do so. So this is my last piece of piece of deer tail that's going in, and again, I'm working my way down that deer tail. So here you see it's flared up just a little bit more, right? And this one's probably flared up a little more than I would like to, but whatever. I think the bulkier and the more flared up it is, the better, to be honest. But so I trim out my excess here and then wrap it up nice and clean. Now, I'm going to add in some lateral scale again, but this time it's going to be the bigger version. So this is, gosh, I think it's the medium one, or the large one. It is the opal large lateral scale. So that, you can see, is much larger than the lateral scale that we've been using. And it's just going to make that lateral line that, you know, most fish have, all fish have, but for bait fish, it's rather prominent along their side, and I just think that that adds a really nice touch, and it's some good flash to add to the fly. It's not overwhelming, but it definitely catches the fish's eye. I know it does. Again, it's not overwhelming, but it's just enough, right? So lay them down on each side, do one on each side. That way, each side has sort of this scale, this lateral scale, and I like to trim it again right to the end of the hackle or pretty close to. That way it goes down the whole backside of the fly. So then you have some extra room. Work your way back to where your last tie-in point was, and this is white schlappen. So it's a different feather. It's good for wrapping and kind of making these heads, and I'll show you in a second here, but I really like this. Just to sort of, I don't know, I feel like it finishes up the backside of the fly for this articulated pattern, and it just makes a cool looking head and kind of keeps everything nice and tidy together, and I just like the look of it. So what I do is I begin wrapping this schlappen and just palmering the fibers backwards. If you get a bucktail fiber or two caught, don't worry about it, it's not a big deal. But so I wrap right to the eye, and I go as far as possible. with this schlappen, and these are some of the longer fibers, so you can use pretty much as long as schlappen fiber as you can find. So once I am set, I'll start tying my wraps, and I work back over the schlappen, so I work my way back so that those fibers are really locked in there, because they have a tendency to break if they're not locked down. So and that's it for the back side of this fly. So you can see it's very bulky. It's super light though, super light. This pattern weighs almost nothing. You can throw it really easily with a 7 weight, and you can cast it a country mile with a 9 weight. So that is the back side. All right, so all I do is just put a little tie-in point there, and I'm going to super glue this head. Again, feel free to really super glue the hell out of this, because it does not matter. It's going to be hidden, right? It's going to be hidden for the most part. So I was debating on showing this part, but I guess I'm going to. This is how I connect the two pieces. Basically, I just lay the wire down and wrap over it. I make sure that the wire goes right to the eye of the hook. I don't fold this wire back over because there's no hook on the trailing part. So there's very little tension usually pulling on the back side of the fly. I overdo it here. Basically what I do is I do a bunch of wraps, and then I super glue the hell out of it, and then I do a bunch of wraps again. And this, I've never lost the back to a fly, and I've caught some pretty good sized stripers, you know, with this fly. And I've also caught a lot of pike on this fly, and I've never lost the back. So, you know, this is how I connect it. There are safer ways to connect it. You can fold the wire back over itself, so you tie it down and then you fold the wire back over itself. That's the safest way to do it, but I see no real need because there's no hook in the back of this pattern, right? So I'm going to let this dry, and then we'll pick it back up. Alright, so the first step is tying in some flash. We've done 2 tie-in points, so it's time to add some flash. And here I think I grabbed 6 strands, which I said I don't do, but here I accidentally did it on accident. So, but same concept. I'm just tying it on either side of the fly, keeping them separated out, so we have equal amounts of flash on both sides of the fly. Basically, I do this flash just to kind of cover that initial segment, that wire. It just adds a little protection. So here's where we're going to start doing our hollow ties. All of them are going to come from the middle down. I'm going to avoid the top of the bucktail, right? So our first hollow point tie-in, and I like the length of it to go about halfway back. So what I mean by halfway is from the tie-in point where we are right now to the saddle hackles, to the edge of the saddle hackles. I like my bucktail for the hollow tie-in points to go about halfway back. So I'm lining it up right now. The tips are going about halfway back, and I just trim off the tips just to make it even, make it nice and easy to tie in. Now, since it's not a bare hook, when you pull down on the fibers, it won't spin. So what you need to do is wrap once, twice, sometimes I'll do it 3 times, but then push down on top with your thumb and then pinch on the side. And I just kind of repeat that, pinch and pull until I feel like I have a full 360-degree covering of bucktail. Okay, so there, keep pinching, keep pushing, and as you can see, they flare up because I've used sort of towards the bottom of the bucktail. All right, so the fibers flare a little bit. And then I just use a pen. There are fancy tools to push back the fibers, but I just use an empty pen case. It works just as well. And here's where you can decide, okay, do I actually have a 360-degree covering of bucktail? And for this one I did, so boom, pull my thread straight forward, and then we can start building a cone to get that tie-in point folded back there to get that hollow tie with a nice profile. Now you want to work on building that profile up. You don't want to start with it crazy, bulky. What I like to do is start with it slim, not as slim as your tail, because again, you're trying to build bulk, but I don't want it flared basically straight up. So what I do is you just build this taper, and the taper is very important. Don't try to get it all pushed down at once, because it will never work. All right, so just keep working on this. And here I'm going to try to wrap it so you can see. Boom, you see the fibers go down ever so gently. So each wrap that you can build, each taper that you can build, you can make that that body profile a little slimmer, right? So there's our first tie-in point, and you see it's not incredibly flared up, but it is, it's bulkier than our tail, and that's what we want to do. We want to work in waves, right? We want to work in segments, not all at once, but in segments, right? So again, I'm going to do the same exact thing. So I'm going to speed this up, but it's literally the same exact hollow tie-in, no different than the one that we just did. All right, so I have my second hollow tie-in point, and you know what comes after the second, every 2 tie-in points is some flash. So this flash is going to be a little different. What I'm going to do, instead of putting it on each side, is I'm going to drape it over the top. All right, and you can see our fly is starting to get a little bulkier. The bottom is sort of a misrepresentation because the vise is pushing it. Look more towards the top of the fly if you want to get a representation of the bulkiness. So what I do is I loop my flash onto my thread, and then I spread it out so it's on top. Now what this does is it gives a good layering effect to the fly, and when it's in the water, what it really does is illuminates the whole fly with flash. So rather than just having the flash on the side, the whole entire fly now really lights up, and not in an overwhelming way, but in a way that a fish does when you see it in the water. The whole thing is kind of shiny, but it's not like overwhelming, right? But you can tell, oh, that fish is shiny, right? So that's kind of what this is trying to imitate. The last tie-in point is very close to the eye, so you have to be careful not to crowd the eye. So when you do your final hollow tie-in point, right, be very, very careful not to crowd the eye. It's very, very easy to do so. So when I tie it in here, all right, you really need to focus to make sure that your fibers aren't sliding forward and that your thread is not sliding forward. All right, so really do a good job of that. That way it will make this second point, or right after this, the tie-in point past it towards the eye, much, much easier. It'll just give you more room to work with, right? So there's my thread. Notice it's not sliding forward at all. Really, really pay attention to that. And when I have a 360-degree covering with my bucktail, I will cinch it down, and you'll see, boom, this one is flaring up quite nicely. So there we go. If you see me plucking the fibers, all that I'm really doing is trying to separate out strands, because they are tangled. Strands will get tangled sometimes. So here, just trimming up my bulkhead, that backside was just, is a little crazy. I usually don't cut it because I think that it adds to the bulkiness, and I kind of like that, but that one was just a little too crazy, so you can trim it down if you want to. Alright, so here's my final tie-in point, and everything looks good. I'm going to go ahead and push those fibers back. This one I made a little thicker, a little more fibers than the previous two, just because I want that head to have a little more bulkiness. So I really use force here. See, I'm pinching. So when you pull the fibers back, you'll notice that they kind of bunch in together. They kind of bunch up. And if you pinch that little lip there where they kind of bunch up, you can get them to lay down in a much nicer profile. Now, when it gets wet, things will change a little bit, but basically how you've tied it is essentially how it's going to look in the water. So if you look at this, see, I have a nice profile. I've started at a low trajectory, and I've built it up all the way to the head so that it's kind of a gradual increase in trajectory. So my angle is increasing. This gives the profile of fish, right? When you think about a pogie or some type of alewife, that's sort of the profile they have. So I have three options here. One, you can put tab eyes. So here are some tab eyes. You just put them in there. I personally don't think that eyes matter at all. So I don't put anything on this fly. I just keep it as is. You can put other things on there like JC, Jungle Cock. You can put that on there. A lot of people do that. Me, I don't. Right here, this is it. I whip finish, call it good. And this is this year, in 2020, this is my most successful pattern. Sometimes I will put some peacock curl on the top, but again, I don't think it actually matters. So all white seems to work best. I whip finish here, and then I load it up with super glue. Again, these flies go through hell. I use them for pike and stripers a lot, and anyone who fishes for either knows that they're quite aggressive fish, and they really do some damage to some flies. So there's the pattern. Super fishy pattern. I really love it. Well, thanks for joining us, guys. Check us out on Instagram at Maine Fly Guys, and at our website, mainflyguys.com. We get some really cool stuff coming for you guys. So we hope to see you next time. Leave a comment below if you got any questions, and thanks for watching.